Hello, composers. As always, begin this week by going over the pieces that your classmates created last week and filling out the feedback forms. Most people have been really good about this topic so far, but I do have to address one of the elephants in the compositional room here, the overuse of 4/4. In his autobiography, Frank Zappa devotes Chapter 8 to exploring music. In there, he has a rather interesting look at hateful practices in music. In particular, he states that, and I'm quoting, "Science has just proven that Americans, who can barely get their shit together on the assembly line, find it absolutely impossible during their precious off-duty hours to dance to any song unless it's in 4/4 at 120 beats per minute." This is a truism for almost all forms of popular music, but why? Well, because that's the default in almost every DAW for pretty much everything. And with the exception of Dorico, which has no default time signature or meter, it's also the default in almost every score writer program. Furthermore, thanks to overquantization and the preference of MIDI over human drummers, we typically get this 4/4 subdivided into 4 groups of 2/8 notes with electronic hand claps on beats 2 and 4. For the love of all that is holy, please don't do this. It's boring. And more specifically, it leads to what a former professor of mine, Mark Sullivan, referred to as the tyranny of the grid. What that means is that everything you compose will invariably fall into the rhythmic grid of whatever meter you're using, especially if it's in 4/4. So how do you get out of that? Well, stop thinking about equal subdivisions of beats. In other words, in 4/4, you have 8 eighth notes. Arranging them in 4 groups of 2 is only one way to think about them. What about 2 groups of 3 and 1 group of 2? Which would sound like this. Or a group of 3, a group of 2, and another group of 3. Or we could mix it up. How about 2 plus 3 plus 3? Or something more advanced, like 5 plus 3. Or even 4 plus 3 plus 1. The point is, there are far more interesting patterns than 4 groups of 2/8 notes. To say nothing of incorporating different rhythmic values like 16th notes, adding some tuplets, or exploring ideas of rhythmic cycles used in other cultures.